Is like epiphenomenalism under emergentism or the other way around? Or is it
That's
the
a charge against emergentism,
okay.
but it's not part of emergentism per se.
Yeah.
So, oh wait, it's so funny. And well, anyway, all right, now we're live on YouTube here. So let's get down to business. All right, let me bring up there we go. Let's bring up the actual
The presentation.
presentation. I'm not sure why it's not going to the presentation itself.
Yeah, I need diagrams for
Hmm.
this.
Well, diagrams are, I mean, I didn't take the time to actually do diagrams. All right, my computer's just not liking that I'm trying to live stream. It's just kind of freezing up. That's not good. Okay, let's see. Come on. You can do it. You can do it, little computer. Jeez, Louise. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna stop the share and then we're gonna redo screen share. This computer's so old. I need to have IT replace it with a new one because it's one of these things where it's like it's so delayed that you click on something and then you like do some commands and then like it just doesn't do anything and then it goes slowly through all the commands that you did, like a minute later it catches up. So okay, we're gonna stop sharing and then we're gonna share again. I'll have to edit this out of YouTube. Jeez, it's gonna be a real pain. There we go. Okay, there we are. There we are. Perfect. All right. All right, everybody. Let's now welcome to our last lecture of the week on emergentism and naturalism in philosophy of mind. Since this is a little bit later than I had planned, I just have my friend Pablo here joining just so I can have someone to talk to. All right, well, let's get started. So, in our previous two lectures, we went over materialism and the materialist theory of mind. And then in the previous lecture, we went over the objections to materialism. So we're going to be going over here in today's lecture, the third of the four theories of mind that we are considering, which is emergentism. So let's begin just with the idea of emergence and the basics of emergentism. So the main proponent of emergence in philosophy of mind here is John Searle of the famous Chinese room argument, and Searle argues for this theory of emergence. And we'll get in a moment into what emergence means. Um, by arguing that both dualism and materialism are wrong, but that there must be an alternative naturalistic account of consciousness, whereby we say consciousness is not identical with brain activity, nor is it something separate from and non-physical, separate from the brain activity and non-physical as the dualist claim, but rather that consciousness somehow emerges from brain activity. That is, it's produced by brain activity, but it's not the same. And Sterile notes right that the dualism materialism debate comes about because of a false assumption that the mental and the physical are mutually exclusive categories. Yeah, and this comes from the assumption that the physical is limited to the material, is limited merely to publicly observable material bodies that are made out of actual particles, and so therefore, if consciousness can't be located as a property, a physical material property of the brain that we can observe observe and that is identical with, synapse firing or something. If consciousness isn't that, then it would seem that we're forced to dualism. Yeah. Now, materialists, right, take all physical things to be made of matter, which itself is not conscious. And as we talked about in our previous lecture, right, they deal with the mental by either eliminating consciousness. So, like Paul Churchland denies consciousness is real, or by, as with identity theory, reducing it to material states, namely brain activations, the activations of neural networks. Now, Searle finds this reduction problematic, as we saw from his Chinese room argument, right? He argued, right, that consciousness cannot be identical with physical brain activity, because if it was identical with physical brain activity, then it would seem that that since that's the activity of non-conscious particles, right, then we would have to say a computer could be conscious as well. But as the Chinese room argument illustrates, right, the computer, right, does not have any intentionality, does not actually understand the data that it is processing. Yeah. And likewise, the materialistic account does not account for qualia. Yeah. There's no place for the experience of what it's like to feel pain, or what it's like to see red, or what it's like to taste chocolate. So Searle proposes an alternative theory of naturalism, which he calls biological naturalism. So Searle is a naturalist who rejects materialism. So let's just remember what naturalism is, right? And how it differs from materialism. So materialism is a form of naturalism. Yeah. So naturalism says all facts about the world must have physical explanations. All facts about the world have physical causes and physical explanations. And the materialist says, yes, that's correct. But the materialist says all physical things are material and observable. So the materialist denies the existence of anything except publicly observable matter. Yeah. And Searle thinks that this is too restrictive a notion of what the physical is. Yeah. What the physical is. He thinks that we should rather embrace a broader concept of physicality that would include both the material and the mental. So there are four main points on which Searle critiques materialism. One, he says it falsely assumes that the physical is limited to the material, and that's the only way to define physicality. Second, he thinks that that materialism errs because it fails to distinguish ontological reduction from causal reduction. That is, the mental can be physical without having to be identifiable with a material being, and there's an alternative way we can conceive of the mental as being physically explicable. Third, and he's going to say that the mental is caused by brain activity, and so he notes that that in order to understand how consciousness can be caused by brain activity or emerge from brain activity, we have to modify the materialist notion of causation. Materialism typically takes causation to be a temporal relation between events that happen before and after in time. But Searle argues that there can also be simultaneous causation, which is top down or bottom up, where higher level features of a system can be caused by lower level features or vice versa. And last, he argues that features of an object needn't be identical with the parts of an object or with features of individual parts, that there can be such things as system level features that belong to a whole without belonging to any particular part. Let's go through these. So here we have this quote where he kind of lays this out. First, real physical phenomena are located in space-time. Thus, electrons are physical and numbers are not. The idea of abstract numbers, just like not this pair of fingers, but just the idea of the number two. Second, their features and behaviors are causally explainable by microphysics. The solidity and liquidity meet this test. Ghosts, if they existed, would not. Third, where real physical phenomenon function causally, the solidity is a real physical phenomenon. Rainbows are not real physical arches in the sky. They do not cause anything. So here we have his three marks of the physical. First, a physical object has a spatiotemporal location. Secondly, we say that that the physical is ultimately explained by causal activities of fundamental particles according to the fundamental laws of physics. And third, he maintains that a physical thing is something which has the causal power to affect other physical entities. Now, on Searle's view, the mental would seem to meet all three criteria. Yeah? That is, if I have a thought at a particular moment, I look outside and I think that tree has green leaves, right? That thought is occurring here in the library at Loyola because my office is way too cold. They're working on the AC and they just cranked it down to like 60 or something. It's unbearable. But my thought is occurring in a particular place at a particular time, right? Secondly, he's going as his theory of emergence will maintain. He thinks that that consciousness is caused by or emerges from brain activity, and if that's the case, then that brain activity would itself be something that is traced down to the brain activity being explained by the behavior of the molecules that make up the neurons, and the molecules that make up the neurons are explained in terms of the atoms, and the atoms are explained in terms of the particles. So ultimately, he thinks that that if we had a complete science, right, that we would be able to explain everything in terms of microphysics. And third, he notes that obviously mental states do have causal powers, yeah, and that there are higher system level features that do seem to have the power to affect other physical entities. So let's get into these second 2 points. And so first, let's note these two types of reduction. So the materialist argues, right, that for consciousness to be real, it has to be something physical, and therefore we have to reduce or identify conscious states with material activities. That is, they have to be the same type of thing as, they have to be identical with some observable existing entity. So this would be a case of ontological reduction, where we say that one kind of thing is reduced to or is identical with another thing. Yeah. So let's say A exists and is made of B, C, and D, then A is identical with B, C, and D. So, for example, a car on an ontological reductive view would be identical with just the parts that make it up. Yeah. There's nothing over and above the parts, right? A car is just this collection of material parts. Yeah. But Cyril posits that there's another type of reduction that we can have, namely a causal reductionism. Causal reductionism doesn't reduce a whole merely to its parts. It maintains there can be a whole that's the greater than the sum of its parts, but that it doesn't exist independently of its parts. So if we say A exists and is not identical with its parts, B, C, and D, but everything about A is causally dependent upon B, C, and D, then A is not ontologically reducible. It's not the same as, yeah, B, C, and D, but it is wholly dependent upon and thus is causally reducible. We would say that A does not have any existence on its own apart from B, C, and D. So an example here would be if you project an image on a screen, that image that's actually physically on the screen is something independent of, in terms of it's a separate entity, right, from the projector. But the existence and properties of the image are all causally dependent on and explained by the projector's features and activities. So the image, although it's not part of the projector, yeah, it's not identical with the projector's with the things the projector is doing, rather it's a product of it, is nonetheless dependent upon them. So he takes this to be a way in which we can say something can exist distinct from the brain that nonetheless does not exist independently of the brain. Yeah. And so here, consciousness would be akin to the image, and brain activity would be akin to the activities of neural firing. All right. So when it comes to the notion then of emergence, right, we would say that Cyril maintains that there are various physical properties that bodies have as wholes that are not identical with, but do depend upon the parts that make up the body. They're what we might call system level features. Yeah. There are features of a whole that depend on the parts, but which aren't found in the particular parts themselves. So here we have two examples, right? A table is solid, right? No particle making up the table, though, is solid in the way that we typically mean solid as opposed to liquid or gas, right? Particles aren't, an atom is neither a solid, a liquid, or a gas, right? Only complex substances made up of particles can be solid. liquid, or gas. So the table's solidity is not a feature found in any of the individual particles, right? Um, but nevertheless, it depends upon the arrangement of the particles. Without the particles, you can't have a solid table. And the way the particles are arranged is the cause of the solidity of the table. Likewise, we say that water vapor is gaseous, liquid water is liquid, right? And ice is solid. Now, gaseousness, liquidity, and solidity are not features of individual H2O molecules. In fact, the ice, if we melt some ice and then we evaporate the puddle of water that the ice melts into, those can be the same water molecules present throughout the entire state changes. Yeah. So obviously, gaseousness, liquidity, and solidity aren't features of the individual H2O molecules, right? There's not liquid H2O molecules versus gaseous H2O molecules versus solid H2O molecules. Yeah. Rather, the gaseousness, liquidity, and solidity of the water in these three states are features of the body made up of the molecules. Yeah. They're features of the body made up of the molecules. They don't exist independently of the molecules, but they don't both, these aren't features belonging to the individual molecules as individuals. They belong to the individual parts as members of a whole with a certain arrangement. So Cyril thinks that this kind of dependence here is a type of causal relation. So he notes that the materials assume the typical Humean notion of causation, where causation is taken to be a relation between discrete events that occur at different times, with the cause occurring prior to the effect. So the classic example, right? The cue ball, you're playing billiards, right? The cue ball hits the eight ball at time one. And then after that, the eight ball rolls into the corner pocket. And so they would say, the cue ball hitting the eight ball causes the eight ball's velocity, momentum, and rolling. Yeah, causes its motion. Yeah. Now, their cause and effect are separated in time. One happens before the other. And typically, most materialists will assume that causation is not a simultaneous relation. That a cause is never occurring at the same time and causing its effect at the same time it exists. They always think about it as a sequence or order. But Cyril notes, right, that there can be other types of causation that are non-discrete, where we don't have distinct things happening at different times. Rather, there can be two aspects of a single thing which are related as cause and effect at the same time. And so these would be called bottom up and top down causation. Yeah. So, for example, bottom causation, right? That the changes in the motion of H2O molecules, right, causes their the solidification of a body of water such that it can support the weight of heavy objects. Yeah. So there, the solidity of the ice, right, depends upon it comes about simultaneously with changes to the parts. Yeah. So the feature of the body of water as a whole, right, is caused by or emerges, right, or is dependent upon changes to the parts. On the other hand, there can also be top-down causation, where a system level feature can be responsible for or explain changes to the parts. So take a wheel. Yeah. Wheels are made from molecules, right? When a wheel is rolling, right, down the hill, we say that the molecules that make up the wheel are moving, right? They're changing location. But the wheel is not moving because the molecules themselves are moving. That is, the molecules aren't moving independently on their own, and thus the wheel is rolling because of the cumulative motions of the individual parts. Rather, we say the wheel starts to roll because it's round. Yeah. So the roundness is not a feature of the individual molecules that make up the wheel. But in virtue of that roundness, there's a change to the whole, which affects a change in the parts of the whole. And so in this way, we can say that this higher feature, right, can be a cause of physical changes in the material parts that make up the whole. And Cyril says that properties like solidity or roundness, yeah, which are system level, can be both caused by material observable parts, yeah, but not be reducible in terms of existence to them, but be reducible in terms of dependence to them. but that these system level properties aren't necessarily just epiphenomenal. That is, they can have an actual causal influence or role on and affect the parts of the whole. Yeah, affect the parts of the whole. And so last, let's comment on the notion of identity here. Yeah. So we have two types of identity that we typically consider. There's object identity and compositional identity. Object identity is the example that we went over before. The morning star is the same entity as the evening star, right? Venus is Venus, yeah. And then compositional identity, right? The chair is just the same as, or is nothing more than the pieces of wood that make it up. But not all features of a composite body need to be identical with features of the individual parts, right? So the solidity of the wheel or the roundness of the wheel is something real, yeah? And it's a feature that belongs to the wheel, but it's not identical with a particular feature of the parts, yeah? That a particular feature of one part, yeah, of the wheel. Nor is it identical with the arrangement of the molecules that compose the wheel, yeah? With the actually arranged molecules. The arranged molecules make up a round wheel and a solid wheel, yeah? But the solidity itself is not the same as the arranged molecules, right? It's not the same as the actual molecules that are arranged, yeah? So we can't reduce it to the parts that make up the wheel or to any particular feature had by any one part. So with these points stated, right, we have Cyril explaining this. The wheel consists entirely of molecules. So when we say that solidity functions causally in the behavior of the wheel and the behavior of the individual molecules that compose the wheel, we are not saying that solidity is something in addition to the molecules. That is, we're not saying it's some separate entity. Rather, it's just the condition that the molecules are in. But that feature of solidity is nonetheless a real feature, and it has real causal effects. Yeah, it has real causal effects. So, with this stated, then this leads us to Cyril's theory of biological naturalism. So he holds that mental phenomena, right, consciousness, so thoughts, feelings, beliefs, sensations, imaginings, all these things are system level emergent properties that are causally reducible to, but not identical with, the neural activity in the brain. So just as the roundness of the wheel or the solidity of the table or of the ice is distinct from the parts, yeah, the parts, but nonetheless depends upon them. He thinks conscious states are produced by brain activity, but aren't identical with the particular neuronal firings. So in this way, he agrees with arguments against dualism that mental states aren't non-physical properties of a non-physical substance. He thinks contrary to dualism, right? That brain activity is the source and cause of consciousness. But he also agrees with arguments, and he makes arguments against materialism, right? That we can't reduce psychological states merely to physical, observable brain activities, yeah, without absurdity. He thinks that consciousness is not actually the firing of neurons. He thinks it emerges from neuronal firing, but it's not actual neuronal firing. So if consciousness is not a non-physical property, a non-physical substance, and if consciousness is not a physical activity, a material physical activity, the only alternative then, it would seem, if we're assuming naturalism to be true, is that mental phenomena are physical properties of the brain caused by, but not ontologically reducible to or identical with, material brain activity. Yeah, material brain activity. Cyril thinks that this dissolves the conflict between the dualist and the materialist. The dualist is right that consciousness is not material brain activity, but the dualist is wrong that consciousness is non-physical. And the materialist is right that consciousness is physical, but the materialist is wrong to assume that the physical is simply the material. So that's kind of the main points here on the notion of emergence. So in our next section, we're going to get into critiques of emergence, and this will include getting into different ways in which consciousness might possibly emerge. So if that's a point that either of you were wondering about, right, we'll get to that in a second. Otherwise, are there any particular questions thus far? No, we're good. All right. So let's get into some problems for the theory of emergence. Now, in order to understand this, we need to distinguish, identify different ways in which a property might be said to be emergent. And Searle identifies two ways in which we can say something emerges. So we can have structural emergence or quantitative emergence. So structural emergence is when, due to the way the parts of a whole are arranged, the whole will have, in virtue of that arrangement of those parts, certain properties that depend on the structural arrangement of the parts. So, for example, take a box, right? A box with six sides, right? Each side of the box on its own cannot contain a ball. You put a baseball on top of a piece of wood, right? And you tilt the wood and the ball just rolls off, right? Rolls on the floor. But if we arrange the sides, right, into a box structure, suddenly the ball can be contained by those six sides. But it doesn't, but the sides aren't containing them merely on their own. The property of containment belongs to the box as a whole, and it emerges or depends on, right, the structure, the structural arrangement of the particles of wood. Yeah. The way that they have been arranged into a box shape. And we would have as similar examples, right? The liquidity of or solidity, liquidity of water, solidity of ice, right? Gaseous permeability of water vapor, and things similar to that. On the other hand, we have quantitative emergence, where quantitative emergence is the idea that all the members of a whole have the same property as a whole, but to a much smaller degree that they can't actually produce any determinate effects or any observable phenomena. But when added together, the cumulative the accumulation of these individual properties ends up manifesting in one single larger property that can produce an effect. So one example, the one given by Madden, right? If we have a children's choir, right? Each child singing very quietly, right? It might not be detectable, right? If you just have one child sing quietly, you might not be loud enough to be detected by a microphone and be heard by anybody. But if we have 100 children singing quietly, right? The cumulative sound, right? Generated by all 100 children would be together loud enough to be detected by a microphone. So the group as a whole is loud enough to be heard, but no individual member is. Yeah. So although the members have the same property as the group, but but they have it to a different degree, such that they can't produce the same effects. Yeah. Only the group can produce that effect, right? Only the group acting together. Another good example would be if you're trying to, for example, move a very heavy object, right? One person pushing on that object, right, or pulling on that object, right, you probably won't be able to move it, right? But if you get a group of people, right, and they're all pulling at the same time, right, the combined forces of the members of the group will be sufficient to move the object. But the thing is, no one member actually has enough force on their own, right? So the composition of forces here leads to a action that causes a motion which emerges from the combination of these individual things. Yeah. And that combined force doesn't belong to any one member of the group, right? But there is a single force on the body, right? Let's say we're pulling a boat, right, with a rope, right? There's a single force of the rope, right? But the force the rope is exerting, right, can be decomposed into all the separate forces, such that there is a phenomenon that emerges from our collective action. So these are the main two types of emergence that people will identify, right? People will identify. So we might say, for example, temperature. Yeah. I was talking with someone from the chemistry department a while back who said, "Oh yeah, temperature is an emergent phenomenon. That is an individual that is an individual atom, right? Vibrating, right? Will not necessarily have temperature. Yeah, will not have a measurable temperature. But if you have a bunch together, you will get a measurable temperature. I'm not quite sure how that works, but that sounds like a case of quantitative emergence, I would assume. So this leads us to an argument against the emergence theory of consciousness. So, step one, if psychological states emerge from neurophysiological states, and they either do so by structural emergence. So, psychological states are structural features of the brain, given how your brain matter is arranged. When there's brain activity in virtue of the arrangement, there will be conscious states produced. Yeah. Or B, quantitative emergence. The parts that compose the nervous system are all a little bit conscious. And when added together, there's a single unified consciousness that kind of comes out of them. Okay. So if these are the only two options, then if we can disprove both A and B, then we can disprove emergence. So step two, we claim that it can't be structural emergence because psychological states cannot be accounted for in terms of structural complexity. And step three, it can't be quantitative emergence because the elements of the central nervous system do not possess any sort of consciousness at all. Therefore, if it's neither A nor B, then we must conclude psychological states do not emerge from neurophysiological states. All right, so let's look at the strategies that are given to defend 1, 2, and 3 here, yeah, and how the emergentists respond to 1, 2, and 3. So regarding step two, then, or the claim that it can't be structurally emergent, we see these arguments are mainly made by dualists. We see a return to the simplicity argument of Leibniz, yeah. So the simplicity argument, right, held that psychological states are metaphysically simple, cannot be produced by the arrangement of a multitude of parts, right? So whereas, so we say that there's a single act of consciousness, it does not have different parts. There's not a left side of my awareness of a sound and a right side of my awareness of sound, right? I might be aware in my right ear or my left ear, but I'm aware of the sound in a single, simple act, yeah? When I have a thought, right? When I think the tree's leaves are green, right? There's not different parts of the thought occurring at different times. I just have the thought all at once as a single thought. There might be several words in there, several concepts, yeah. But I grasp all the concepts in one single act, right? In one single act. There's one act of awareness. Now let's contrast this with emergent properties like solidity, right? We can say, well, look, or the solidity of, say, a phone, right? I can say this phone is solid. Well, the solidity of this part of the phone, right, depends on these parts, the parts on this part of the phone, and this part of the phone solidity depends on the others, the molecules that make up the other part of the phone. Yeah. So there we can divide up, right? Solidity. We can say the solidity of this half of the phone depends on the structural arrangement of these parts. Yeah. And the solidity of that part of the phone depends on the structural arrangement of those parts. So the solidity is divisible or distinguishable into parts. It's not simple. It's not one single state. Yeah. But psychological states can't be divided into parts like this. Yeah. And if psychological states don't seem to be divisible into parts, then it seems psychological states cannot be produced by mere structural arrangement, right? Your structural arrangement. And most emergentists are fine with this. Yeah. Most emergentists are fine with this. They don't think that this is how consciousness necessarily emerges. So let's look at then the other way that consciousness might seem to emerge, quantitative emergence. Well, if consciousness is quantitatively emergent, well, then just like all the members of the children's choir are all a little loud, and then the combined group is very loud, right? Well, all the little bits of my brain, my nervous system will have to be a little bit conscious and then added up, right? And in the right arrangement, but still added up. It's in virtue of their all being conscious that when gathered together in the right arrangement, a single unified act of consciousness emerges. Yeah. But it seems that the matter that makes up our body isn't conscious, right? If you're, you know, if it's made up of, if your mind's made up of biochemical, if your brain's made up of, biochemicals, right? They're themselves made up of atoms that are themselves made of quantum particles. Quantum particles aren't conscious, are they? Well, if they're not conscious, then there's no way consciousness could emerge by accumulating enough small conscious particles together. Therefore, it seems that psychological states can't be produced by non-conscious material parts that compose the brain. So we have this quote here from Gail Strawson arguing against the emergentists, right? You can get liquidity from non-liquid as easily as you can get a cricket team from 11 things that are not cricket teams. In ideal physics, it would have to be just as plain how you get experiential phenomena from wholly non-experiential phenomena. But this is what boggles the human mind. We have no difficulty with the idea that liquid phenomena, which are wholly physical phenomena, are emergent properties of non-liquid phenomena, which are wholly physical phenomena. That is, right, water molecules are neither liquid nor solid nor gas, but somehow liquidity emerges from things that aren't liquid. Yeah. But when we return to the case of experience and look for an analogy, it seems we can't make do with things like liquidity, where we move wholly within a completely conceptually homogeneous, non-heterogeneous set of notions. We need an analogy on a wholly different scale if we are to get any imaginative grip on the supposed move from the non-experiential to the experiential. So if we're going to say, yeah, it doesn't seem like you can get consciousness from the non-conscious, right? Well, what options does the emergentist have? Well, one option that is made, one argument that's made by many, not many, but by some philosophers, is to argue that matter itself is conscious, that consciousness is just a fundamental feature of all matter, just like mass and charge. So there's small bits of charge in an electron. Well, there's also a little bit of consciousness in an electron. And so large scale consciousness in humans just emerges from organizing, right, the right combination of particles such that you get enough consciousness together, and then suddenly there emerges a higher amount of consciousness, yeah, a detectable amount of consciousness. Now, in favor of this, we can say this is consistent. This would solve the problem, right? If we say, look, consciousness just is a fundamental feature of matter, then fine. I guess that could explain how consciousness emerges. But there's several downsides. One, it seems very implausible, right? This table does not seem to be conscious, right? It would seem that the table would have to have consciousness, yeah, right, but a very low level. That just seems absurd, right? How is it conscious of the world? It seems like I'm conscious because there's interactions with, I have organs and whatnot, right? But secondly, we might also wonder how a collection of individual conscious things can produce a single conscious subject, right? So if you have return to our children's choir, right? If each child, right, is aware of the sound in the room, does that mean that there's that from their individual awarenesses, there is in addition a single awareness of the group as a whole? The group as a whole has a single shared awareness, a single group consciousness, right? That the group is a subject that has a single experience? It seems not. Yeah. Right. If you're watching a movie with a bunch of people in the theater, right, there's not a single awareness of what's going on screen. There are a bunch of individual experiences of what's going on screen. Yeah. There's no experience kind of that belongs to the group as a whole. Rather, there's a shared experience, right, which is shared by each individually having their own individual experience of the same thing. Yeah. Of the same thing. So it seems like this is a real problem. And so it seems very implausible. Now, alternative defense would be something like this. We could say, well, first, look, emergence is the only plausible or possible theory of consciousness, right? It can't be dualism. It can't be materialism. It's got to be emergentism, right? And if we've proven by argument that it has to be emergence, well, then we don't need to rely on our prior theories of our prior examples of emergence, as we have with structural or quantitative. We've discovered a new fact: consciousness emerges from and is produced by non-conscious matter. Yeah, non-conscious matter has the power to produce consciousness. We don't know how, but it just does. This is something we've discovered, right? We need to further investigate it. Yeah. And it shouldn't surprise us, right, that we can't detect this, right? Detect this when we have, brain matter, right, in the lab. If you cut out a bit of the brain, right, it's no longer part of that structure, yeah, right? So they're not going to produce consciousness when they're part of a functioning brain. So, for example, if you break apart, a water molecule, right, and you look at the individual hydrogen and oxygen atoms on their own, just looking at the features of hydrogen and oxygen on their own wouldn't necessarily tell you, oh, when they're combined into water, the water will be able to dissolve salt in virtue of these parts, yeah, in virtue of the bipolarity of the water molecule, right? Looking at a part in isolation on its own doesn't give you any ideas to the powers it might have when joined with other things as part of a whole. So, if not all causal powers of material bodies can be known by considering them in isolation, saying matter is not conscious doesn't refute the fact that it turns out, well, it can produce consciousness in the human brain. How, we don't know yet, but it can, because emergence has to be true. Yeah. Notice this assumption that emergence is the only possible or plausible theory of consciousness is doing a lot of work here. Yeah. Right. Assumption that materialism and dualism both are false and that there are no other theories. And we'll be getting to our last fourth alternative theory to emergentism next week, which gives a different of hylomorphism, which gives a different, I think, very interesting alternative to this that endorses that ends up giving us a version of emergence for certain aspects of consciousness, such as sensation and feeling, but it's able to account for how the matter of the brain is conscious in a way that differs from the way that the naturalist does. Yeah, because it'll be conscious in virtue of its substantial form. But that is talk for next week, and we need to go over first form of matter before we get to that. All right, so let's continue. So we can sum it up as this: if consciousness is not the result of structural or quantitative emergence, then either A, it does not emerge from brain activity, or B, it does emerge, but there's simply no explanation of how this occurs, right? Might seem that emergence is just a brute fact. It does emerge, but we can't explain it. Yeah, we can't explain it. So to quote, so Strawson critiquing this point, right, says it's built in the heart of the notion of emergence that emergence cannot be brute in the sense of there being absolutely no reason in the nature of things why the emergent thing is as it is. But if someone says he chooses to use the word emergence in such a way that the notion of brute emergence is not incoherent, I will know that he is a member of the Humpty Dumpty army and be very careful of him. So the idea is if you can't say that it's structural or it's quantitative, right? You're basically saying it just happens. Why? It just does. And Strawson's noting that's not a very good theory. Yeah, we should reject that idea. The idea of brute unexplained facts, right? A brute fact is a fact that is just true and is unintelligible in itself. That is, it's not self-explanatory. It just happens to be true, and we don't know why, and we don't know why it's true. All that we can observe is that it happens to be the case. So the two responses to the charge of brute, that emergence is a brute fact, right? Ultimately, we're going to see that there's three kind of ways we can go about this. The first is to embrace a form of Mysterianism, right? Consciousness, how conscious emergence is a mystery, and we just can't know, yeah, right? But this shouldn't surprise us because you can't perceive your own eyeball directly, right? You can see a reflection of your eyeball, but you can't see your neural eyeball. So of course we can't directly observe how consciousness comes out, right, from our brain activity, right? Because we're experiencing the conscious activity itself, right? We can't kind of turn in and examine what's going on. If I look at someone else's brain, right? Remember, consciousness is a system level property, right? That emerges from, but it's a private, intentional state. So you can't observe that property. Yeah. You can observe the effects of it, you can observe the causes of it, but you can't actually observe the property itself. So there's no way that we can actually see it. It's just kind of a mystery. Yeah. Or we might kind of go with Cyril's approach and say, yeah, it is a brute fact, but you know what? Brute facts are okay, right? I don't have any problem with brute facts. Quote, on the contrary, nature is radically contingent. I'm with human thinking that the conviction that nature must necessarily be the way it is an illusion. It is just that nature turned out one way and not another way. Nature is full of surprises. So I do not regard this sort of objection as any way conclusive against the possibility of a neurobiological explanation of consciousness. It can just happen. It needn't have happened, but it just happens, and we can't necessarily know the underlying basis for the connection. Yeah, underlying basis for connection. And Timothy O'Connor gives a slightly different approach here in this quote we pulled out. So he says, I agree that the relation of causation between one event and another is a species of metaphysical necessity. Now, my objectors make another, more dubious claim. Once we have come to have a scientific understanding of a certain type of phenomena, say gravitational attraction, we can in some sense simply see that the one event had to follow the other. All genuine causal necessity, they maintain, must ultimately be transparent to the inquirer. This connection of true necessity with the inconceivability of things being otherwise is, of course, an old one. Nevertheless, it is implausible, at any rate. Contrary to the objector's contention, we certainly don't see in a transparent fashion the causal necessity involved in even the most well understood natural phenomena. So let's kind of break this down for a moment. Yeah. So what O'Connor is saying here by talking about transparency is the idea that I can express the causal relation in terms of a exact logical formula, yeah, such that I can know the conditions under which any causal statement will be true, right? So I can say A is the cause of B if and only if A is necessary and sufficient for B, and whatever is identical with A will be necessary and sufficient for B, yeah. And O'Connor's noting, look, causation is not necessarily in many cases a clear relationship. Yeah. We can't give every single description under which one type of event will cause another type of event. Yeah. And if we can't give a clear description of every single condition under which one type of event will cause another type of event, well, then it seems that we really don't have a complete understanding of exactly how one event necessitates another, right? What is it about, right? For someone who like me, who's not a physicist, right? If you ask about some quantum interaction, what is it about event A, which always is followed by event B, that caused it? I'm like, I don't know. And they say, well, could it be this feature, this feature, this feature? I don't know. I'm not sure, right? It's not obvious. It's not clear to me. Yeah. So he's saying that in many cases, we're not clear on exactly under what aspect or what aspect of an event produces a change. Yeah. If it's not always clear what aspect of event was the necessary and sufficient condition, well, then why should we expect to find that with, consciousness being caused by brain activity? Yeah. There's a lot we don't understand about the world. So just let's include consciousness in here. The fact that I can't tell you how it emerges doesn't mean it doesn't, because I can't tell you how a lot of other things cause their effects, even though we know that they're causes, right? Gravity is a good example. How does gravity work? We're still not sure. There are certain theories, yeah, but we don't have any clear consensus on how gravity works, yeah. But we would still say that the Earth pulls you down, right? When you jump up in the air, yeah, that the Earth is causing a gravitational attraction. You go down, even if we can't give an account of how the mechanism works. So too, he's asserting consciousness has to emerge from brain activity. How, we don't know yet, but that shouldn't be counted as a defect in the theory. But we but even if we can have this argument, right, that maybe we don't have to say this defense of emergency, where we don't have to necessarily give an account of, is it structural, is it quantitative, is it something else? There still is the question of, well, where did consciousness come from, right? It's one thing to say what causes my consciousness, but why is there consciousness at all? Yeah. Why are there mental beings at all? So the fully naturalistic account of consciousness needs to answer both, right? How it emerges, right? Or given that some notion seems of how it emerges, and also why there's consciousness, period, right? Because the naturalist says all facts have a physical explanation. So what's the physical explanation for the origins of consciousness? Now, presumably, on a naturalistic view, we're going to be going with an evolutionary theory, unless evolution gets displaced in biology by some new, some new theory of the origin of species. Right? Let's go with evolution. Yeah. And so Cyril says, well, perhaps we could say consciousness and intentionality provide natural selective advantages. Quote, we can say that in conscious perception, the organism has representations caused by states of affairs in the world. In the case of intentional actions, sorry, I copy and pasted this, but forgot to delete that space. The organism causes states of affairs in the world by way of its conscious representations. If this hypothesis is correct, we can make a general claim about the selectional advantage of consciousness. Consciousness gives us much greater powers of discrimination than unconscious mechanisms would have. So being aware and having an intentional understanding of your surroundings means that you're better able to respond to them. But the objection to this evolutionary story is that, aside from the fact that it's not quite telling us how it emerged, but that would get back to the first issue, right? But why it evolved, we would say, well, why is consciousness, the actual like experiential first person perspective, why is that beneficial for evolution, right? If reacting to pain, right, helps preserve you, helps you survive, yeah. But we don't just react to pain, but we also experience the feeling of pain. It seems that what's important for my survival isn't that I experience the pain, right? But merely that I react to it. Yeah. The awareness doesn't seem to provide any advantage, right? The reaction to the injury does seem to provide an advantage. Yeah. Right. If you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right, the running away, right, is important to your survival. Experiencing what it's like to be running doesn't seem to be important to your survival. The awareness, the actual conscious experience of it, right, isn't what's necessary. Yeah. It seems that it's just the act of running. So if we could have a so-called zombie, right, philosophical zombie organism, right, which had all the same mechanisms that would allow a thing to react to its environment without having any first person conscious awareness of the environment, it seems that that non-conscious, fully reactive animal would fare just as well as the actually aware conscious animal. Yeah. If they had all the same mechanisms for reacting. In which case it seems that consciousness ends up becoming a bit epiphenomenal. That is, it's something that kind of rides along. It's something vestigial in some way. It provides no explanatory or causal role in the behaviors of a living thing. So if pain awareness evolved, right? We can say, well, for there to be pain awareness, there have to be the processes whereby there's pain detection, and then a pain response. Yeah. Well, why do we need to have this actual feeling of pain piggybacking, right? We already have the mechanisms whereby there can be detection. Why does there also have to be a sensation of it, right? So this leads us then to what's ultimately underlying this, and I've been hinting at this throughout the whole thing. It's the presumption of naturalism, right? So Cyril and the other emergentists argue that emergence must be true because naturalism must be true, right? So if we say emergence is the only possible explanation of consciousness, if naturalism is true, right? We showed materialism, and there's some flaws. Dualism, no, that's not right. The only possible alternative, it seems to be, is emergence if we assume that consciousness must be a physical phenomenon and must have a wholly physical explanation in terms of microphysics. Yeah. The only way we can account for consciousness is on the assumption of naturalism that all phenomena must have a wholly physical reductionistic explanation to microphysics, right, to fundamental particles, is if emergence is true. Yeah. If we assume naturalism, then emergence seems to be the only possible explanation. But Cyril and all the other emergentists are naturalists. Therefore, emergence has to be true. Yeah. But this shows that lying behind the case for emergence is the big assumption here, number two, the assumption that naturalism is true. So Cyril says supernaturalism in any form is not an option. It is not simply up for grabs along with a lot of competing worldviews. When we encounter people who claim to believe such things, we may envy them the comfort and security they claim to derive from these beliefs. But at bottom, we remain convinced that either they have not heard the news or they are in the grip of faith. We remain convinced that they must separate their minds in compartments to believe such things. Given what I know about how the world works, I cannot regard their views as serious candidates for truth. That is, Cyril takes it as a fundamental position that we must reject any sort of notion of the supernatural as real or explanatory of consciousness or life or any other phenomenon. Yeah. That is, the naturalist, as we talked about at the beginning of the book, assumes that there is no such thing as the supernatural that could be a cause in any way of occurrences in the natural world. The naturalist denies the existence of the supernatural, denies the reality, therefore, by definition, of soul or God or any such being. Yeah. Now, this leads us though to need to understand the idea of naturalism again. Naturalism here is a philosophical assumption, yeah, that's used to interpret and guide scientific experiments and theories. Naturalism is not something proven by scientific theories, yeah. Rather, naturalism is an assumption about the way the world is that guides scientific experiments. If we assume everything must be completely explained by the physical, we will only look for physical causes, and we will only craft theories that involve physical causes, and we will think that those are giving a complete explanation. That's not to say that the physical causes don't give a partial explanation, right? or that they're not necessary conditions, right? We needn't become dualists. Yeah. But nevertheless, right? That's say the presumption of naturalism is something that cannot be proven by any scientific experiment. Yeah. Rather, it's an assumption you bring to the interpretation of the scientific experiment and behind many naturalistic positions. Then, because naturalism is not a scientific principle that can be demonstrated or proven by experiment. Rather, it's a metaphysical principle. It's a claim that goes beyond just claims about reality, the physical observable reality and how to interpret it. It goes to a claim about just the nature of existence itself. And so, what lies behind a lot of this is just a flat out rejection of the divine, as Thomas Nagel explains. He says, "I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. This cosmic authority problem is not a rare condition, and that it is responsible for much of the scientism and reductionism of our time." Now, this is a very psychological reason, right? It's I don't want there to be a God, therefore, due to my desire for there not to be a God, for a religion not to be true of whatever form, yeah, I'm going to be a naturalist, yeah. However, right, and that's not to say that we can't have arguments about whether or not there's a God, but but that's merely to say that naturalism is not the obvious default position, right? A case needs to be made for it, just as the religious person, I believe, at least from my own philosophical perspective, should make a case for the existence of the divine. Yeah, we should never just say, I presuppose that only the physical exists, or I presuppose that God exists. Rather, both sides need to make a case. Yeah, the case needs to be made by both sides. And the naturalist here in just assuming right naturalism as the basis for why emergentism has to be true, even if we can't explain how it works, right? Is begging the question a little bit, right? To completely prove emergentism, you'd have to give a further defense of naturalism, yeah, as to why there needn't be an explanation, or why we shouldn't be bothered by the lack of explanation as to how the conscious emerges from the non-conscious. All right. So moving right along, and pausing for 1 second.
Mhm.
Um, I think I've got yeah. There's two more sections. Yeah, we're getting close to the end here. Um, so if you have any questions, I'll unpause and you can ask them.
Yeah.
You-
I had a question, but I kind of think we moved away from that a bit. If I'm understanding correctly, is
Well, how
well,
about you
actually,
summarize it and then I'll hit record again if it's relevant. Yeah,
yeah. It's like I'm trying to think of the other term, physicalism, because I kind of am like
they're
yeah, the
synonymous.
it's like the same thing. It's just that like the emergentists would argue that the materialist understanding of what like that things are
Of what the
material
physical is too limited. Yeah,
is narrow. Yeah.
yeah, it's too
Um,
narrow. Yeah, yeah. So
the
so
emer
yeah, yes. The emergentist is saying um, consciousness is a physical phenomena. Not all physical properties are going to be uh, empirically observable states and configurations of matter. But so long as something is caused, has a physical cause, and can affect the physical and has a spatiotemporal location, it should be counted as existing as part of the physical universe.
right.
And so they're the there we actually they're the the beef really is about less about emergence and more about just what counts as physical. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so I haven't delved into debates about emergent properties outside of philosophy of mind.
Mhm.
But I would be, but I do want to look into that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm more familiar with like epiphenomenalism, but that's because of like I've seen people who describe themselves as I'm an epiphenomenalist, and
Yeah,
they kind of
yeah,
have the similar view of that, but they would go further to say this like, consciousness is just an emergent phenomena that is non-physical in a sense. Like it's not some.
yeah,
That's kind of what they would like
yeah.
concede
Well,
to.
it's kind of like a weird substance dualism in a way, or
Yeah.
sorry, property dualism.
Right. I
right?
mean,
I mean, you get an epiphenomenalism with occasionalism.
yeah, but the thing is that like for the emergentists, while they're saying that it through and through these are physical, but these are distinct. I'm not so sure, at least for me, it's not immediately apparent. Um, given a lot of like, for example, the naturalists.
Uh, you froze? Is this still working? Let me see if my internet's working. Shoot. Okay. Well, well, I'm freezing up on you. Okay. I mean, obviously, I don't see myself as frozen. Do you never see yourself as frozen? All right. Let me close Safari. Maybe that's causing some problems. I always make the mistake of maybe having too many, forgetting to close all my apps. All right. Well, he's going to drop down and come back up, I guess. Okay. Give him a second. Let me text him. All right. But you can see me fine. Okay. Yeah. His internet cut off, I guess. Well, let's just proceed, else we'll be here all afternoon. All right. So that leads us now to some further sets of objections. So emergentism and abstract thought. We're getting to an objection that comes from Thomism, from followers of Thomas Aquinas. Um, so the objection from abstract thought is based around the distinction between abstract universal ideas and ideas of particular things. Yeah. So just the basic idea of the distinction between the universal and the particular. We would say that if Patrick thinks the robin is red, that his thought here contains both universal and particular concepts. So the robin here is an idea of a particular concrete individual, right? Whereas when he says the robin is red, the concept red there is not a particular thing. He's not talking about the particular red that's actually present in on the robin's feathers, yeah, or in the robin's feathers. Rather, it's he's got a concept of a kind, a universal type or kind of color. And universals and particulars differ in important ways. Universals are instantiable and repeatable. Yeah. Particulars are discrete and unique. So I am a human being. Yeah. There can only be one of me, right? Even if you cloned me, right? My clone would not be me. Yeah. But human being is a universal kind, a universal concept. Yeah. There can be multiple instances of human beings. Okay. This leads us to the problem of universals. So when it comes to particulars, it's pretty clear what our particular ideas correspond to, right? So my particular ideas of an individual, sorry. So my idea of my wife corresponds to a particular person, Mary Boyer, who is existing right now in a particular time in a particular place, right? You can go over and point at her, yeah. And statements about particulars are true because of how these individuals actually exist, right? So if I say Mary Boyer is sitting, and that's true, it's true because my wife is actually physically sitting, right? There's an actual way that this individual exists, yeah, that makes that statement true. But what about universals? Yeah. What do our universal ideas correspond to? What makes universal statements true? Yeah. Now, there are two, or rather three, approaches to this problem. First is called nominalism, which claims that there are no such things as universal or abstract entities to which our universal concepts correspond. Universal concepts or terms rather are just names. There is no such thing as red. There are just particular instances of bodies that we happen to call red because they are similarly colored to each other. But there's nothing over and above the concrete particular reds. And according to nominalism, then, there are no such thing as abstract concepts. When I use the term red and I say red, when I make universal general statements about redness, yeah, I'm really, according to the nominalist, just saying, here's a fact that's true of every single particular thing that I call red. And so it's true because of what is true individually in each case. If I say human beings are mammals, it's because every single individual human being happens to have share certain exist in a certain way. Yeah. But it's not that there's any sort of nature or essence which exists, which is distinct from those individuals, which makes these statements true. Whereas on the other hand, we have realism, which holds that universal concepts correspond to or denote something real, something that actually exists in reality. Our universal ideas correspond to something in reality which is universal or common. So there's two forms: Platonic realism, right, which we kind of encountered with our reading of the Republic, where we said that where Plato held, right, that there was the realm of the forms right outside the cave, right? There are separate abstract objects which exist eternally apart from matter. Yeah. And then there's moderate realism, which we'll get into a version of a little bit next week with Aristotelian hylomorphism, where we say universal concepts don't correspond to abstract objects. There's no such thing as two-ness that exists independently of any particular pair of two things, but that maintains nevertheless that each individual instance of a kind has some form or essence present in it that it shares in common with other members of that kind. So I look outside, right? And I see these trees, and I say, these trees are all trees, and they're all called trees, not just because I happen to group them together, but they actually do exist. There's a certain way in which they exist in exactly the same manner. There's something identical in both of them. They have the same form or essence or treeness, right? They both have treeness. And so then the idea is that the notion of treeness, right, is not the same as these particular trees, right? Treeness is something common to all trees. It's not something that just this one tree has, right? So to point to one tree is not to say what a tree in general is, right? So this is just a little setup here. So expressing this, then the idea is that we do have universal concepts, right? And these universal concepts are meaningful. And it seems impossible that we could have universal concepts if consciousness was merely a phenomenon that emerges from brain activity. So, quoting Pannier and Sullivan here, in grasping the complex thought, you grasp the constituent concept neuron. The characteristic neuron is an instantiable. That is, there can be more than one instance of a neuron. The important point for our argument is that unlike particular instances of neurons, for example, the neurons in your head that are firing now, the instantiable characteristic neuron has no spatial location. It's pointless to ask, where is neuron? The same is true in other instantiable characteristics such as validity or consternation. No one asks how many meters separate validity from consternation, or how wide is equanimity. That is, we have these universal concepts, but they don't seem to be physical objects necessarily. Yeah. But nevertheless, we have these abstract concepts, right? We have these abstract concepts. And the idea of neuron as a kind of thing is different from the idea of the particular neurons in my head. The particular neurons are this neuron, that neuron, the other neuron. Yeah. They aren't the notion of neuron itself, because the particular neurons in my head are my neurons. Yeah. Right. They have their particular spatial location, right? But the idea of neuron in general, right, the abstract notion, does not include any particular spatiotemporal location. It doesn't include being made of these particular atoms or those particular atoms. So, if this is the case, this leads us to an objection against naturalism and emergence. So, we say if thought emerges from a neurophysiological process, then there should be no feature of thought that cannot, in principle, be accounted for by features of that neurophysiological process. So, even if consciousness is not identical with brain activity, the idea would be then that insofar as we say that the cause contains in itself whatever on the principles in virtue of which it explains the effect, an effect can't come from something from a cause which isn't able to produce such an effect. Yeah. If there's thought, we would say it doesn't seem like a rock can be a cause of consciousness, a cause of thoughts, because a rock has no consciousness. Yeah. So so going in a slightly different vein, then you say, well, look, thought has universal content, but because they are particulars, neurophysiological processes have no features that can account for universal content. Therefore, there's a feature of thought that cannot be accounted for by a neurophysiological process. And as such, by a modus tollens, we can conclude thought does not emerge from a neurophysiological process. So here the argument basically is that a particular concrete thing with all its specific aspects can't generate an abstract idea. It itself is not abstract. It itself is particular. It itself has all of its particularities bound up with it. So it can't produce anything other than something particular. I, as a human being, can cause human beings, right? I've done so 5 times. I have 5 children. Yeah. But these 5 children are individual, particular humans. I can't produce humanity. I can always produce this or that person. Yeah. So if this is the case, if a concrete particular can only produce other concrete particulars, then the concrete particular neurophysiological processes in my brain can't produce universal content in my consciousness. If so, then we can say thought, or at least abstract universal thought, cannot emerge from neurophysiological processes. Now, this does not exclude the possibility that, say, sensation, which always is particular, right? If I look out at the tree, I see the tree, I'm seeing this particular tree with this particular instance of green in this particular location, right? All the particularity and individuality of the tree is part of my conscious experience of the tree. So we could say, perhaps, right, that my sense awareness, right, could have a particular physical cause. Yeah. Maybe sense awareness, right, could emerge from neurophysiological processes. But abstract intellectual thought does not seem like it could, because there's no way to account for our abstract ideas. Now, before we move on to the last section, let me just note that the main way in which the emergentists would respond to this would simply, it seems to me, be to claim nominalism, say, there are no such things as abstract notions or abstract ideas. There are no abstract concepts. There are no universal concepts in our mind at all. That there is no such thing, such that there's nothing to be accounted for. But it seems to me that we do use universal concepts, right? Universal terms in a real way. We do have these universal notions. Yeah. We had, and especially when it comes to things like mathematics, right? 2 + 2 = 4, even if there's only 3 objects in the universe, right? If there's not 4 objects in the universe, does 2 + 2 still equal 4? I would say yes. What in reality makes that true? It surely can't be the physical constitution of matter if there's only 3 things, right? If there's 3 electrons in the universe and that's it. 2 + 2 would still equal 4, right? What makes that true? Yeah. What makes that true? So there definitely are challenges to that, but to get into debates about the problem of universals and nominalism would go far beyond this course and definitely far beyond this lecture. So let's end by going over questions about emergentism and agency. So one problem that arises for emergentism is that it would seem to deny free will. Yeah. So if emergence is true, right, then as we were saying, all conscious states seem to be caused entirely by brain activity. But if conscious states are caused by brain activity, then even if, right, the choice in that my conscious state of choosing or my conscious desires are top down causes of bodily actions, nevertheless their causality is caused by physical brain activity. I only have that desire. I only make that choice because that act of choosing emerges from brain activity. And if it emerges from is wholly reducible to brain activity, then it would seem that none of my choices are ultimately up to me. They're all due to my prior brain activity, which itself is caused by external environmental inputs, which would make it seem like there's no intellectual or moral agency, so there would be no free will. Thus, if emergentism is true, human agency and free will would appear to be illusions. Now, there are three options for the emergentists to deal with this. First, you can just bite the bullet. You can just deny free will or human agency. Yeah. And there are many thinkers who do that. Cyril, on the other hand, though, doesn't, right? He notes that we literally cannot believe that we're not agents. He gives the example of let's say that you're at a fancy restaurant looking at a menu, right? And you're not sure whether to order, right? The seafood tower, right? Or to get the prime rib. Well, if you say, well, if all my choices are predetermined, I'm just not going to choose. I'm just going to wait. Yeah. I'm just going to sit back and wait to see what I'm going to choose because obviously I'm not in control. But he says, when you say I'm going to refuse to choose, that itself is a free choice. Refusal is a free choice. So in this way, he says we just experience ourselves as agents. Yeah. We can't believe we're not agents because even if we try to believe we're not agents, say, I'm not going to choose anything is to make a choice. So we can't not believe that we have agency. And secondly, he says, if there was no free will or human agency, nevertheless we feel like we have free will and agency, then choice becomes an illusion and epiphenomenal. But epiphenomenalism seems to run counter to evolution. That is, it seems that there would be no selective pressures to evolve a feature that actually has no naturally selective advantage. In which case, the illusion of free will evolving would seem to evolve for no good reason, and would stick around for no good reason. And thus, he says, I just don't think we can hold this. Yeah. Now, another possibility that's popular with some people is to say that our thoughts and choices are free because they're entirely undetermined. That is, they point to quantum indeterminacy, where we can't predict with any complete surety exactly what's going to happen in any quantum activity. But if quantum behavior is indeterminate, yeah, that would mean that the thoughts and choices caused by brain activity, which is explained fundamentally by quantum activity on the naturalist view, would not be predetermined. But Cyril rightly, I think, rejects this, noting first that quantum indeterminacy has just never been detected at macro levels. It's a weird thing. It's really bizarre, but we only ever seem to find it when we're looking at the micro level at particles kind of behaving on their own and not as part of macro sized bodies. And secondly, free actions aren't random, right? There's no free will if your actions are merely indeterminate, right? If they're just random. A random action is not free, it's just not predetermined, yeah? Lack of determinism by external causes isn't what makes the action free. You being the cause and the sole cause, you having control, right, is what makes the action free. So we might have to say, well, maybe freedom, and this is O'Connor's position, which shouldn't surprise us given the previous quotes, maybe freedom is just another emergent property, given that there's nothing inconsistent about the emergence of ordinary causal properties able to causally influence the environments in which it is instantiated. It is hard to see just why there could not be a variety of emergent properties whose novelty consists in enabling its possessor to directly affect changes at will within a narrowly limited range and an appropriate circumstance. So O'Connor's saying maybe free will just emerges, and there is free will and choice. but it just emerges. How? I do know. Maybe it just happens. So we see once again he's taking free will to just be a possibly brute, unexplicable fact. Yeah, we observe or we experience freedom and agency. So maybe freedom and agency just emerge from brain activity, perhaps, huh? Why not? Which I think is not a very satisfying answer, although it is a way to deflect against the objection. This leads us to our last two objections here. First, the as we said that emergence would seem to undermine moral agency, it would also seem to undermine intellectual agency, because as we noted in the arguments against the materialist, um, in order to be able to reason logically, right, you have to not just state the correct steps in the correct order and draw the correct conclusion, but you have to actually draw the conclusion yourself because you understand the logical order of and relation of the steps in an argument. But in order to be able to understand the logical force of an argument, you have to be able to grasp the logical laws that apply to all arguments. Yeah. Which means you have to be able to grasp these abstract laws of logic. But if the Thomistic objection holds, emergentism can't account for the possession of abstract concepts, including the grasping of abstract rules. Therefore, if emergentism is true and the Thomistic objection holds, we would have to conclude that there's no intellectual agency. You simply, right, draw logical conclusions, not because you understand, but just because that's what emerges from your brain activity. Which leads to our last objection, taken from Alvin Plantinga, who says the naturalism leads to skepticism. If consciousness is truly a product of evolution, right? Why should we think that we have any grasp of truth? Because all evolutionary, at least as far as for my understanding of evolution, which I'm no biologist, but I think I have at least good enough understanding, would say evolutionary developments, right, are due to natural selective pressures, and they stick because they provide a reproductive advantage for survival and the continuation of a species. So the benefit of some evolutionary feature being developed, right, or coming about, is that it helps you survive. In which case, we would have consciousness would have evolved because it helps us survive. But it doesn't seem that actually understanding truth is necessary for survival. False beliefs, right, can be very effective and advantageous. Yeah, right. So if false beliefs can be effective and advantageous, yeah, then why should we assume any of our emergent thoughts and beliefs are true rather than just advantageous? We can't be certain. Yeah, we can't be certain that all the ways of thinking, all the human forms of conceptualizing, right, that our natural ways of conceiving of the world are correct because they're true, or if they're just the way we tend to think about things because it's advantageous, but actually the world is not the way we typically theorize about it. That's not to say we could not necessarily discover certain connections, but the theories we formulate, right, might not actually get at the way things really are. And if that's the case, it seems to be a further problem for emergence. Well, that leads us to the end of our lecture for today. So just remember that your papers on arguing for or against dualism, for or against materialism, or for or against emergence are due on Sunday, and all the readings must be completed by Saturday night. All right. Cheers, and I will see you next week.